The topic for this video is parallel and perpendicular lines and definitions. Lines in the same plane that do not intersect are called parallel lines. Non-vertical parallel lines have the same slope, but they have different y-intercepts. If they had the same y-intercept and the same slope, they would then be the same line. Lines that intersect at a right angle, also known as a 90-degree angle, are called perpendicular lines. If two vertical lines are perpendicular, then the slope of one line is the opposite of the reciprocal slope of the other line. Now, another way of stating that, so instead of saying opposite of the reciprocal slope, we could also say that those two lines have negative reciprocal slopes. And we'll look at an example of that in a moment. So negative reciprocal slopes. So if we look at the two examples below here, so for parallel lines do not intersect, therefore they have the same slope. So the slope of one line, in this case 3/5, is equal to the slope of the other one, also 3/5. Now for perpendicular lines, the slopes are negative reciprocals, so opposite of the reciprocal of one. So the slope of our first line is 3 divided by 5, and the slope for our second line is the negative reciprocal. Well, the first line has a positive slope, so the negative of a positive is a negative. And then the slope is 3/5 of the first line, so the reciprocal of that is 5/3. Slopes of parallel lines. If M1 and M2 represent the slopes of two non-vertical parallel lines, then the slopes have to be equal to each other. Slopes of perpendicular lines. If, again, M1 and M2 represent the slopes of two non-vertical perpendicular lines, then the slope of the first line is the negative reciprocal of the slope of the second line. Now, interestingly, that also means that the slope of the first line times the slope of the second line is going to equal to -1. And we can look at that, right over here. So if we take M1 and we multiply it by M2, notice we have a positive times a negative, which is equal to a negative. Notice also the 3's cancel. 3 divided by 3 is 1. The 5's cancel. 5 divided by 5 is 1. So this equals -1. We can determine if the lines given by equations are parallel, perpendicular, or neither by finding their respective slopes. And in order to do this, we first need to solve for y. So we need to solve for y to identify the slope of each line. So for our first equation, 2x plus 3y equals 7, we need to solve for y, which means the 2x needs to be on the right-hand side of the equation. Since 2x is positive, we're going to subtract it. So 3y is equal to -2x plus 7. And then in order to identify the slope, we need to get y alone, which means we're going to divide everything by 3. So that means y is equal to negative 2x divided by 3 plus 7 also divided by 3. But in order to identify the slope, we need to identify the coefficient of our x term. So this is negative 2/3 times x plus 7/3. So for our first line, our slope is negative 2/3. Negative 2/3 or negative 2/3. Those are equivalent. And for our second line, notice that the y is on the right-hand side. So for 4x set equal to negative 6y plus 2, we actually want the y to be on the left and the x to be on the right. So we need to add 6y and subtract 4x and leave the 2 alone. Now dividing everything by 6, we have y is equal to negative 4x over 6 plus 2 also being divided by 6, but you can simplify. So y is equal to, notice negative 4 and 6 are both even, so they reduce to negative 2 by factoring out a common 2, and 3 again by factoring out a common 2. 2, 6 also can simplify. 2 is even, 6 is even. They both contain a common factor of 2, so that will simplify into 1/3. Now notice here, both the 7/3 for the first equation and the 1/3 for the second equation give us our y-intercepts, but that's not needed for this conversation. We are only interested in the slopes because we're trying to determine if these lines are parallel, perpendicular, or neither. Now, have you noticed that our slopes are the same? And if the slopes are exactly the same, whether we think about the original negative 4/6 or the simplified negative 2/3, it is equivalent to the first slope, negative 2/3. So these lines are parallel. And I wanted to spend just a little bit of time with you remembering about special lines. So let's look at 2x equals 6, which simplifies to be x equals 3. Now, does anyone remember what kind of line this is? What does it look like? And think about the fact that x is 3 no matter what y is, which then gives us a vertical line. And then y equals 5. Y equals 5 no matter what x is, so that gives us a horizontal line. And if we were to quickly graph both of these, remember label x, label y, show scale. X equals 3. And y equals 5. How do these two lines relate to each other? And do you see that they intersect at 90-degree angles? Therefore, these lines are perpendicular to each other. And your question, given the slope of a line, m equals 2/3. Determine the slope of a line parallel to this line, and determine the slope of a line perpendicular to this line.